In today's episode of the Endless Possibilities podcast, we join host Gareth as we dive into the profound world of non-duality with Lisa Cairns. From a life-altering awakening in Bali back in 2011 to her exploration of consciousness and spirituality, she delves into her battles with suffering, her enlightening experiences with teacher Roger Castello, and the transient nature of pleasure. Unravel the intricacies of suffering, the body's role in awakening, and the deconstruction of personal identity. Embrace the necessity of confronting suffering for a deeper understanding and self-realization. Stay tuned as we journey the path to enlightenment in another fascinating episode of the Endless Possibilities podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast. My name is Garrett and I'm very excited to introduce Lisa Cairns today, our latest guest. I'm going to give a little introduction to Lisa. In Bali 2011, Lisa suddenly lost total control while eating banana fritters with ice cream. There was a sudden explosive energetic shift. At that moment, it was understood beyond the intellect, non-dual philosophy. For the past 12 years, Lisa has traveled around the world, sharing an amazing Indian philosophy called non-duality. She has spoken in bookshops, cafes, yoga centers, universities, schools, the UK's NHS, conference centers, festivals, theaters, and in someone's front room. Now, Lisa predominantly communicates her subject through the internet by live streams and in small group events, supervised by her advisor, Khaleesi. In her talks, Lisa tries to communicate the limitless nature of life, which you could say is at the root of every philosophy, religion, and story. Lisa, hello, how are you?
Hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, and
Thanks for
you.
being a guest. Yeah,
Yeah, pleasure.
yeah. So I came across Lisa about 7 or 8 years ago. Somebody introduced me to her talks. I used to really, really enjoy listening to her talk, and I would always know she would be walking through a forest with her dog, talking about non-duality, and she just had a really amazing way of communicating the message. So, Lisa, would you like to give us a little bit of your background, please, on what got you started into non-duality?
Okay, yeah. We just, before we started recording, we started talking about Roger, so I'll speak a lot about Roger Castello. Yeah, so, well, what got me into seeking was, well, I mean, this is unknowable, really. Yeah, we'd have to be a super quantum brain to really understand why something happens. But if we just look in the limited story that we think we know, I would say it was two things, most predominantly suffering. And then the next, maybe because I seemed to have awakenings when I was, younger, but maybe that was because of suffering, or maybe the suffering came because of the awakenings, or yeah. So those were the two things. So when you go through suffering, I think you then begin to ask bigger questions, like, well, what's this about? Why? What is the point to life? What am I meant to do here? And luckily, when I went to university, a friend of mine was already on the spiritual path, or the friend I made was already on the spiritual path. So she introduced me to Buddhism and to Satsang and to all of this. And so then I went on a massive, crazy journey, and I lived in London. So there were lots of teachers coming through. I did lots of meditation with the Buddhist Center and with Vipassana. I experimented with psychedelics. It was all kind of like not all in one go. It was, through many years. And then eventually in Pune, at Osho's ashram, I met my main teacher, Roger Castillo. And then I went and lived with him in Australia for 3.5 years. And he destroyed me. It was like really intense. It was like a 3.5 year intensive retreat. And yeah, I was his only student at the time, except our two next door neighbors. So it was just the three of us and Roger. But the two next door neighbors, we went through periods where we would do like satsang every morning, but most of the time it was just me and Roger. And I think Roger was maybe at that time, not consciously, but preparing to teach more people. And so it was like I was his practice subject, but he wasn't conscious of that, and he wouldn't say that at all. And yeah, and I'm forever grateful for that. Yeah, it was really an intense experience. It sounds really easy, like you just went and lived with someone for 3.5 years in the forest, but it was actually a lot deeper than that, because I cut off from my previous life. You know, I gave everything up and went and lived in a country where I didn't know people. And then also from living in London and having quite a busy life, we lived in the forest. So it was also super remote. So it was like being on retreat full time. And then also having the trust in somebody, like, and confronting, you know, all your issues when you're isolated like that and alone like that. All your issues come up, because when you're in a society, you can keep putting it on what's happening. But when you're taking away what's happening around you, you then have to go inwards. And I was already on that path of going inwards, but it was like fast forwarded, I think. And
it sounds like one of them dark room retreats.
And then also having Roger, that's like, he was so on it. Like I wasn't allowed away with anything. Like, you know, like he would just on it, like pointing out everything. And his teacher was Ramesh, and we met because of Ramesh. I was actually at Osho's ashram because I was sick. I'd been in Mumbai going to Ramesh's talks, and then I got really sick. I think I ate a grape. So this is a very silly thing to do when you're in India. And I got like super sick, like 3 days in hospital. And
they call it Delhi belly.
Yeah. So then I'd been to Osho's ashram before, and I went there because it's like super clean. And yeah, I think when you're that ill and sweaty and hot, like all you can begin to think about is cleanness, and like there's aircon there and marble floors, and yeah, that just seemed very appealing. So I went there and met Roger there. So he was there with other friends, and we didn't ever meet at Ramesh's. So then it was the friends that he was with, I knew from Ramesh's, you know, so that's how it happened.
Yeah. So the awakening that happened, so the awakening didn't happen with Roger, right? It happened later.
Yeah, well, there'll be many, I think, like this path, there's like many things that shift. Like, so when I was with Roger, like many things were shifting, and there were, you know, things happening, like waking up. I think you just mentioned that you woke up in a sleep, and like waking up in deep sleep and suddenly realizing that I wasn't looking out of the eyes, you know, and then like falling in love with things for no reason. So there were many shifts that happened. And then when I was in Bali eating banana fritters, like in the most unspiritual circumstance, even though everything actually was totally spiritual at that time, because I was acting out what Roger said to do, which was in every given moment, do exactly what you feel like doing. So in that moment, I was like having banana fritters for breakfast with tea, you know, so I was actually really acting out what he'd said, like really to the T. Like, and then this had been happening for a period where I just kept falling in love with things for no reason. And I'd just be sitting there, and then the sofa would like become really beautiful, or someone I didn't like would become really beautiful, and I would just like love them. And this like emptiness experience had been happening, but it'd been like coming and going very quickly, maybe at max lasting a day. And then your mind, you know, can't really think what that was. And Roger wouldn't let me really talk about experiences. So I never really gave it much attention. And then when I was in Bali, I was sitting there and everything just became really, really intensely beautiful. And then it just kept getting more and more beautiful. And then it felt like my feeling of my I am and my feeling of my consciousness, that I mean, we could go into detail about what consciousness is, but the
Yeah.
consciousness that's inside the head, like, so these two fundamental things that sort of felt like me also, but not the personal awareness and not the thoughts and everything, but this kind of base consciousness and I am sort of kept expanding. So it was very weird experience, and I didn't know prior to this that these weird experiences could happen. Like it was, I didn't know that that existed. And then it just kind of kept expanding and expanding until it got to everything, which is kind of a really weird thing. So it's all mental in a way. And then when it got to everything, it kind of disappeared into everything. So my sense of being and my sense of looking sort of disappeared into everything. So then it felt like my character was appearing in an immense, and my character was like a vessel appearing in an immense space or an immense something, and that immense something was looking, but it's seemingly looking through this vessel, and that immenseness was also empty and love. Yeah, so that
Lisa,
was what happened.
was that the collapse of the subject object?
I mean that, yeah, I suppose. I mean that's what my mind has concluded since, but
Yeah.
at the time, like it didn't come with any labels. It was just like an immense immediacy with everything. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned you had previous shifts, right? Little smaller ones.
Yeah.
So, I mean, coming back to ignorance, right? Ignorance, we just identify as our thoughts and our emotions and the body and a separate entity. You weren't in that though when you had that awakening in Bali, right? You'd probably moved into like what Eckhart would talk about witnessing, and then
Oh
from
yeah.
witnessing probably into self-realization, where there was a kind of like the awareness became aware of itself, but it was probably like an emptiness, was it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the
So
shift in Bali was into fullness, into the heart.
well, yeah, like I don't really know of the order, because I think for a period prior to Bali, it was all coming and going. The love, the
Yeah.
emptiness, like so, but I just didn't really have a cognition of it. The only thing that I really definitely knew, like that I could cognitize, was waking up in deep sleep. And that was a really profound thing, because that I could cognitize, because I then realized that like in that waking up in deep sleep, there was no part of Lisa that was needed for there to be awakeness. Like, I mean, we don't really know if what that was, that experience, but what it did was it eliminated this idea that any part of Lisa was needed in order for experiencing. So I don't really know what happened there, but that was like a really clear experience. The other ones were more murky, it's like emptiness would sort of, everything would become a bit more empty, but there would be bits of Lisa, and then there would be love, and there would be bits of Lisa. Whereas this last thing was really clear, but definitely for sure there'd been the moving into the witness. There had been emptiness experiences and love experiences, and that had been happening for many years. In fact, it actually started when I was a teenager, but I didn't know any of that until, like, and actually until Bali happened. I couldn't piece it all together until, and then I looked back and then was like, oh, yeah.
Wow. And did the sense of doership fall away?
Yeah, yeah, and that had been really, I mean, that's what really Roger challenged me on when I was living with him. So Ramesh and Roger are very much that everything's God's will. And I think this is like, for me, the fundamental part that really broke me. So really being challenged on that in a personal relationship. So Roger was my partner, and really being confronted with that in partnership, that it wasn't his acts, it was God's act. It wasn't my act, it was God's act. And yeah, and I'm sure we crossed lines and boundaries where it became maybe at points not the most healthiest thing, but it really broke this idea in me. And I think that's really important. So at that time, what I was enacting was in every given moment, do exactly what you feel like doing. And really what that's saying is let God speak, not let the person speak. Not that you can do that, but it's like the brain is kind of at that point, or this energy is kind of going deeper than the personal will. There's like breaks in it where it's going deeper. And what I would do is I would just sit and wait for that deeper movement rather than my personal will. And that's what I was doing when I was in Bali. Like, so I was there by myself and I was enacting this.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, we'll come back to that later because that sounds like a teaching of some sorts that we can kind of pick
Yeah.
apart. But so that's your story, right? That's what's led you to, I guess, becoming a teacher from there on. So I guess if we get into non-duality, right? And you mentioned it yourself, right? What got you onto this journey was suffering, right?
Yeah.
And when I meet a lot of people, a lot of them are just suffering, right? They just want an end to that suffering. So, like, why do we suffer, Lisa? What is the cause of suffering in us as humans?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I was taught and what seemed to shift in me is it's this identification with the personal awareness, the body, mind, and the thoughts. So the consciousness and the sense of being or I am becomes this entity which feels like it exists inside the mind. And this is
Hmm.
actually an imagination, but it feels really, really, really real. And that's what seemingly broke, that imagination. And it
Yeah,
energetically becomes this feeling like something is existing inside this body in time, rather than there being this emptiness where everything's flowing through. There's like this solidness that's hitting up against things and then going into massive stories in time. And I suspect, and from what I teach, I mean, anything that I say is actually all from my teachers, really, even though spontaneously in this moment it's not coming from me, which is weird. But really, like, it's like this is everything that this body was seemingly taught. So I can't claim anything. Like, it's like everything I'm saying, even though I'm saying it.
well, you're talking from experience, right? You're
Yeah,
living this,
yeah,
and life is just happening through you, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's like it's coming spontaneously from this moment, but in a way, like this body has been taught in a particular tradition. I suppose that's what.
yeah.
So it's a particular tradition, and I suspect that the problem arose as the word arose, as we began to speak. So it wasn't
I,
at the very, very beginning. It would have, as soon as we began to speak, we needed a subject and an object,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
this became an energetic expression. And I think there's so many quotes which I can't quote right now that
Sure,
talk
sure.
about this, like
Yeah,
through in the
but it's
Bible,
it.
like it's the word.
Yeah, it's me and mine,
Mm.
I guess people see themselves as a separate entity, and I need to get, our egos. We pull in what we want and we push away what we don't want, and we generally want to have all the good stuff in life, right? And it leads to a lot of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just such a
So
lie. The good stuff is not where the juice is. The
yeah,
good stuff comes and goes, like what we think is the
yeah,
good stuff.
yeah. And it's funny because like we're pleasure seekers, right? And we want to find pleasure and happiness and fun and laughter. And when you really kind of start to understand our true nature, it's like all of these things that we once chased, they're just fleeting, right? They
Yeah.
they come and it kind of feels, oh, for a few minutes and then it goes and then it's just left. It's gone. You can't get it back.
Yeah.
So so from suffering, where do we go? What starts to happen to us, right? We start to suffer, we start to realize that we can't find lasting happiness in the outside world, right?
Yeah.
In objects. And so what
Yeah.
happens then?
Well, what happened for me and my teachers say is that, so the first one that I came in contact with was very strongly and really resonated with was the Buddha. And his words were the realization that life is suffering. So, and this is so deep, and this is incredibly painful to realize this. So first of all, you recognize that you're suffering. So you come to that realization, you want to change the suffering, but then you have to recognize that life is suffering. And that I mean, like, I still find now I go deeper and deeper into that. Like, that's such a deep teaching of what that means exactly. Because you could break it down into many ways, like, what is the difference between your suffering and life? And what does it mean that life is suffering? It's got so many depths to it. And I feel what has to happen is you have to really accept this, that life is suffering, no matter whether you accept it in the way that whole of life is your projection, or that it's life suffering as a person when you're identified, however you interpret that. Like, he apparently said that the first realization of the Four Noble Truths is that life is suffering. So this is what you have to realize. And I feel like you have to realize that in order to be really prepared to go in and give up your seeking and your desire. Because if you don't really realize that this life is never going to give you what you're looking for, you're going to carry on in seeking, you're going to carry on in pleasure and pain. So there has to be this moment where you're like, or maybe it's many moments where there's a real preparedness to give it up, really to give it up. That, and that's so deep again, like that your relationships aren't going to be it, your parents aren't going to be it, you're never going to make anybody happy, you're never going to free anyone, you're never going to accumulate more good than bad, all dreams that you have. That's a massive asking. It's breaking down of everything that people know and have built. And
Yeah, it's a deconstruction, right?
yeah.
Nobody gets anything in awakening. This is
Yeah.
the fun thing. I get so many people, and they come and they thought, well, I thought I would have got something at the end of this. It's like, no, this is a deconstruction of everything you've ever believed about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So the body, what does the role of the body play in awakening, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I always noticed that the suffering was in my body. I would feel pain in my body. If somebody said something mean to me, I would feel it like a knife in the heart. So in your teaching, what part does the body play?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's many different angles you can go on from that, but when you move to the witness, so when you stop just being your thoughts and just being what you believe, and you move to witnessing your thoughts, as soon as that begins to happen, you begin to witness the body simultaneously. And then most people, it's like, oh fuck, my body is in a lot of pain. A lot of people don't realize that. Like, I didn't realize that my body was in a lot of pain until I began to witness. And then I would notice that, I would wake up and I would have like pain in my heart area, and not physiological pain, although that's, how do we really know the difference, but more like emotional pain, like energetical pain. There was also physical pain. And then that can be another big barrier, because, it's then again the apparent choice. Do you confront that, or do you carry on medicating yourself with pleasure? Because confronting it is painful. So what happened here, and what seems to happen for a lot of people, is then there is an investigation into the energetics and the emotions and the feelings in the body. And then there tends to be a balancing out, but that can take quite a few years, and this can be an incredibly painful process, because the unconscious is coming up. You have to sit through immense pain and accept it.
Yeah.
You have to understand the pain. You have to relate it to the apparent story. You have to relate it to the thoughts. You have to relate it to the external. Notice that what's happening in your body is often reflected externally. There's lots of, this can take many, many, many years of going through this and noticing all these correlations, that how thoughts are correlated to the outside as well. And when this is done, it seems, for a lot of people, but there's always exceptions. There's always This life always has exceptions. So this is just what happens
Yeah.
for a lot of people. So when that has happened and there's been immense energetical, psychological release, understanding, witnessing, then you then might go deeper into non-duality and begin to question, well, what is my body and what is the world? So when the body is more calm and not in so much pain, and then this is another depth to the exploration.
So Lisa, would you say that's trauma stored in people's body, right? And when they start to witness, all of a sudden it creates a spaciousness and oh, okay, there's something there, right? There's these pockets of density in my system and in my body, right? And the more I sit with them and the more I witness them, the more space I give them to come up and to feel them and to be with them, right?
Yeah.
But prior to witnessing, we're oblivious, right?
Yeah, we're just acting it all out, thinking it's the outside world that's the problem, or that it's me that's the problem, but we're totally unconscious of it. Yeah, and the way Roger taught me is also it's habits and conditions. So yeah, trauma and then habits and conditions, which, I mean, from coming from Buddhist and more Hindu background than we'd say from previous lives. But some people, I don't really care if people want to go there or not go there. But yeah, so habits and conditions and trauma, yeah. And it's stored in the body.
Stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that they are blocks to awakening?
No, not necessarily, but when it's really dense, then there will just be immense seeking because it will be very painful. So then the seeking will be for pleasure because you'll be trying to relieve it. So there'll be immense, and that immense seeking then will make one focus on the outside world than go inwards because you won't want to go into inwards because it's really painful. So I wouldn't say that they're blocks of stuff, and I would say after shifts and awakenings, you're still going to have traumas and habits and conditions, but they won't be to the strengths where they're sending you off into big seeking patterns or big dramas or stories because there's an ability to hold them or to, yeah.
Yeah, but it kind of seems that the suffering is the force that drives a lot of people into spirituality, right? So, I mean, I guess in a way it is the ego that kind of finally realizes that it can't find it in the relationship, it can't find it in the career, can't find it in, the money in the bank account, and then it goes, okay, well, if it's not there, it has to be in enlightenment or spirituality or awakening, right? And it goes after that then, right? And there's a seeking energy that's needed. Yeah, so it's a funny one.
And then again,
Go
this
ahead.
is what it goes, and then it goes on its spiritual journey. But this is, I mean, this is such a gift, but that also has to be destroyed. But it's such a gift because then it destroys so much of the trauma and the karma and the seeking patterns. It kind of becomes. Do you remember like playing Pac-Man? Like
Yeah,
he'd eat all the balls, and then when he touches a
yeah,
ghost, he goes and eats himself.
yeah.
It's like that.
So somehow it kind of turns on itself and destroys itself, right?
Yeah.
The ego. Yeah. I guess that's probably the nature of self-inquiry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And was self-inquiry part of your process?
Yeah, but not so much like the who am I, like Ramana would have taught, but yes, that's self-inquiry, but more of the style of Ramesh and Roger. Or jnana
And
yoga, like bending my mind in all types of bizarre angles.
so Ramesh Balsakar, right? His
Yeah.
guru was Nisargadatta Maharaj. Am I
And I
correct in
think
saying that?
and it was Ramana Maharshi, yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. So,
But he
yeah,
didn't
and
really directly teach to do the who am I. So Nisargadatta,
I am
Ramesh,
that.
I mean, was teaching for 30 years, so it changed. But Nisargadatta would teach stay in the I am,
Mm.
like putting the attention in the I am. But just in doing that in a way that is self-inquiry and just the nature of the way he spoke, it is self-inquiry, but it's just not like Ramana's, like what we who am I? That never really, although I was exposed to that question never really tickled me in any way. Like,
Yeah.
who am
It's
I?
quite difficult self-inquiry.
Yeah.
A lot of people get very frustrated with it. But I guess spiritual awakening, a lot of the times it needs like a spark or a catalyst to kind of ignite it, right? Through self-inquiry or contemplation
Yeah.
or, some during your awakenings, did that happen? Was it anything on reflection? Because in mine, funny, when you mentioned that it's, eating the banana fritters, right? Doing nothing spiritual. Mine was the same. I was in the gym one morning doing a workout and I had my awakening. But I kind of stopped and I contemplated the nature of reality. I was like, oh, the sounds that I'm hearing, they're not external. I'm hearing them inside. And I was like, the sun coming through the window. I stayed going, that's not external to me. That's inside of me. And as I said that, there was a rip. It sounded like fabric in my mind, but it was kind of like the Pac-Man kind of like turning back on itself. I had somehow just kind of like, I don't know, short-circuited how my mind worked
Yeah.
by saying that to myself.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And I noticed that a lot of people with their awakenings, it's something that they do, right? It's they sit and they contemplate or they go inwards or they question. So for you, was
Yeah.
it similar? Was there any of them little shifts? Did they happen that way or?
Yeah, I don't know if I can remember, but that was kind of what I was doing all the time. But mine were more like there was a car accident one time, and then in the car accident, the shock of it seemed to tear something. So it was more these types of things. And I did what you said, but I think my main practice was, putting the attention in the I am,
Yeah.
more like a focus, which is a whole nother path. And then also doing jnana, so that is what you're talking like wisdom yoga. It's like doing yoga of the mind.
Mm.
But so I was doing like bending my mind in all types of positions, but a lot of what I was doing in the day was putting the attention in the I am. And then prior to that, it was the Buddhist of putting focus. So I think mine were more like not from doing something like what you describe, which I've heard lots of people talk about, like these certain thoughts just suddenly tear something open. Mine was more from this repetition of moving the attention back, but in the background, I was doing this. Like I was doing it when I listened and went to Satsang, and when I sat by myself, I would question these things. It's
Mm.
interesting, isn't it? All the different ways.
Yeah. Well, for me, I wasn't a spiritual seeker. I had been meditating for years and I had never, I didn't understand what, self-inquiry was. It just, for some reason on that day, I chose to just question everything I was hearing and the noises and it just happened. But yeah, it's a funny one. It's a funny one. And it couldn't have happened in like, I mean, the gym, it's like,
Least
it just so
spiritual
wasn't.
place, the gym.
At least exactly the least spiritual. And yeah, yeah. So I guess can we get into your teaching a little bit and how you teach because you you you
Yeah,
you give talks, right? And you
yeah,
you see students and
yeah,
so like if you get someone who comes along who's suffering, right? How do you teach? What do you give them?
yeah.
How,
Yeah, so I think it's really unique to every person. So it depends, how they're suffering. So if they're really mental person, then I would most probably recommend body stuff. So I like somatic therapy, yoga, breathing work. Teach them maybe to do focusing the mind rather than too much wisdom yoga, too much self-contemplation. Yeah, so it's different with everyone. And then if you get somebody that's really emotionally confused and really lost in emotions, they're not lost so much lost in the narration, they're lost more in like emotions are sparking off everywhere, then I might encourage them maybe to do more something like acupuncture or Chinese medicine. What's the Indian medicine called? Ayurvedic medicine. So more
Ayurvedic, yeah.
like body physical massage, this type of thing. And then once the emotions are a little bit more calm, then to investigate, but to be careful with that investigation, because yeah, you've got to, like, you don't wanting to, if somebody's really emotional, then yes, there's all different ways. But I tend to recommend people off. I tend to recommend them to other teachers and to other practices. I will do emotional body work with people, but lightly, and then I will recommend them on. I prefer just doing the wisdom yoga or the non-duality, but that's not appropriate to always do. Like, you've got to, first of all, witness and calm the body. And yeah, so once they're more conscious of what's going on inside of them and aware of all these things, then I like to, what comes here and what's really passionate here is then to do the bending of the mind. And in the bending of the mind, I would say the most important part of the bending of the mind, when you're teaching the bending of the mind or the acrobatics of the mind, is actually the stillness in which it's being spoken with. So it's like you're bending the mind up here, you're doing like acrobatics up here, and then the base of it is absolutely non-movement. I say, yeah, and that's what
So the bending of the mind and the substratum is silence.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
And
what I passionately do, but the person's got to be stable in their. They don't necessarily need to be stable in their emotions, but they've got to be stable in understanding how to navigate emotions in the mind.
So, I mean, like, what does a typical seeker who comes to you? I mean, do they come in a group? What way do they work? Do they sit and listen, or do you work with them on a kind of a one-on-one basis, Lisa?
I do smaller groups where it's like 6 people in a group. And
Yeah.
currently at the moment, what we do is we study I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. So we study it and then we sort of explore and talk about it. And then in the background, like depending on who's in the group, I will message them and sort of do a little bit of personal work behind the scenes. But most of the time I don't do the personal work. I guide them to like other teachers that do personal work.
So you notice that, yeah. So like maybe people have traumas or their minds are very active, and you
Yeah.
could say, okay, well, I know this other person; they're great at doing this. You can go off and kind of work with them parallel. Is that kind of how you do it? So they go off, yeah, maybe see a trauma or a therapist, or
Yeah. So
okay,
in the
yeah,
book
wonderful.
clubs or in retreats, I'll get to know people better and I'll perceive, so say what I said about if they're going lots into the mental, and then I'll encourage them, but they might not do that. It's like God's will. You suggest something and then it's God's will as to whether or not they pick that
Of
up.
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And I mean, say you get someone who has a spiritual awakening, right? A shift in consciousness. How do you work with that person then? What does that look like? Do they come
Yeah.
back and
It totally depends, because sometimes people can have a shift and then fall back to sleep again.
yeah,
So then,
yeah.
there's all this. It's so different dependent on who you're working with. And then after, if somebody does have a big shift, then like then it's like a gentle guiding into them finding that natural flow. That
Mm,
God's will or natural flow, and simultaneously, not getting stuck in the absolute or the relative, like, so it all comes together, and then they can have
mm,
the awakening, like you said earlier, on the nothing side or the everything side. So if it's the nothing side, then we have to then look at the everything side. And if it's the everything side, the love side, then we have to look at the emptiness side.
yeah. And you spoke about them falling back asleep. Like, why do you think that happens?
Because there's still desire, there's still seeking. It's very interesting to watch people fall back to sleep. But I don't know if you've experienced this when working with people, because some people really can't remember even the conversation when they were expanded, when they were like, or non-identity, they can't remember it. And so it's so fascinating to then start talking to them and realize they can't really remember it. And you can see this kind of cloud and they're like, oh yeah, but because it's gone again.
Something comes over the eyes, doesn't it? It's like
Yeah,
they've gone
yeah,
entered back into the dream. Yeah, and you can
yeah,
see it. You can really see it in the eyes. You can see.
yeah,
It's funny. It's funny when I had my awakening. I had these 2 days of huge expansion, and then I woke up one morning and it was gone, and I was like, oh my God, this feels terrible.
yeah,
It's like I'm back into contracted I-ness. I was like, I'm going for a walk to see if I could get it back, And I mean, it closed down for a couple of hours, and I don't know. I kind of got the feeling that it was the losing it was part of it. It was almost like the universe was saying, okay, here's some contrast, right? You had
yeah,
2 days, beautiful vacation. Let's take it back away, right? Now you're back into contracted I-ness. This is what it's like. And then it would come back, the openness would come back. And I was like, oh, it's back. And then, for about 4 or 5 days that happened. And then eventually it just stayed open.
yeah,
But it was terrible. It was like, when I lost it, it was like, oh, this is just the worst thing ever.
yeah,
I had originally had the winning lottery ticket and it had blown out
yeah,
of my hand.
yeah. And I come across this a lot. I think, like, I come across this a lot in people. I think in this story, just because there was so much spiritual grounding beforehand, it's like so many teachers, even though I was only 30, so I say so much. There's some people that have been doing it like 40 years, they're like, oh, but it was so intense for
Yeah.
those like 10, 12 years that I did it. Like there was some deep knowing not to touch anything, like, not to seek after it, it wasn't like a conscious thing, but a deep knowing not to touch anything, like not to get involved. It was like,
Mm.
that you don't get involved. That happens. There's no, you can't make it or take it away, or like
Yeah.
it's not involvedness.
Yeah. It's funny because like the individual doesn't do any of this, right?
Yeah.
It's like like how can the individual ignite a spiritual awakening in itself? It just can't. So
Yeah.
the fact that like if you lose it, that you can somehow come up with a plan or some sort of a way of getting it back. It just you can't.
Mm.
You just it
Yeah.
is what you describe as God's will. It
Yeah.
just it's almost like the fruit will just fall off the tree when it's ripe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your awakening happened quite young.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that helps? I mean, I kind of tend to find that older people, they kind of had a lifetime of, beliefs and they really get stuck in their ways. Whereas younger people, they don't have a lot of that. And I find that younger people are waking up a lot faster nowadays. Have you
Mm.
have you come across that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. I think it's
Yeah, it's
possibly because the brain is, I mean, we don't know if it is the brain, but the brain is more, I mean, this neuroscience say this, the brain is more, what's that word, malleable? Like it's
yeah,
more like so the brain is more prepared to change or move or grow new neural pathways. And the same,
yeah,
yeah, like I don't really know so much about the brain and neuroscience, but
yeah.
I
Me neither.
definitely, yeah, I definitely think that the brain moves more. It's easier to move. I mean, there's dangers in that and there's beauties in that, because, I was so naive, in my seeking. And I'm so grateful that I was so naive because I think, if I was older, I would have been like, hang on, this idea is a little bit dodgy. Like Ramesh saying, you got to listen to everything Roger says. But I was like 26 and I was like, okay, here we go. Whereas if I was like 46, I might have been like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's like but there's a beauty to that, and then there's the sadness of that naivety as well. It's like everything in life, isn't it? It's always got all sides. It's never
Mm.
black and white or one way or the other. So, but definitely,
Yeah.
I think that younger people are waking up quicker. I also think that this most probably is like it's becoming more and more in our society. you know, so
Mm.
it's a bit like with the computers, you know, how like kids are so good at computers now. You give them an iPad and they're like instantly like 3 years old. You're like, how did you know that? It's like it's almost in our DNA or something. And so because it's coming more and more into the knowledge, I suspect there's that element to it as
Yeah.
well.
It's funny because I had a YouTube channel for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And I mean, it had taken me 2 years, 2 or 3 years to get to 1,000 followers. And my son, he was about 10 at the time, within 3 months, he started his own YouTube channel, and he had one video that got like 250,000 views, and he was 10. And I was like, how did you do this? You know? And he had more subscribers than me in 3 months. So yeah, there's definitely something happening. I also love seeing, we talk about the face, right? It's almost like I see people and I can see them getting it. They just get it. You know, the face softens and the head goes to the side, and you can actually see that the mind is starting to slow down, you know, whereas you could
Yeah,
have someone who's a spiritual seeker for 30 years and they're still caught up in all the books
yeah,
that they've read and the concepts and how it
yeah,
should be, and you
yeah,
know, this is how the teachers teach it, and you know, so yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
it seems to be that younger people definitely get it a lot faster for some reason. And there's
yeah.
a lot more people waking up.
It seems that way, doesn't it? Yeah.
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 Do you get a lot of people that, you know, just seem to be popping in your talks and
I don't always know if I know because I do a lot of talks online, so I don't know,
yeah,
like I
who's
don't always see the audience and but sometimes, yeah, no, I won't say that actually because maybe expose someone, but yeah, I definitely feel, but I also feel that there's a lot of like people out there getting this, not because like so there's a lot of people that are suffering. Like I feel like a lot of society is really, really suffering. It seems to
mm,
have come get worse since COVID. I don't know if you feel this just energetically, but the people, especially the people that are into this subject, there does seem to be this like popcorn effect that's happening.
yeah.
So these extremes, like in mainstream society that aren't into this, there does seem, I don't know, I just feel since COVID something changed in society.
Mm.
I don't know if you,
It's Yes, yeah, it's funny. It's funny. I think in a way it brought an awful lot of people online, right? And I think the power of the internet brought us closer together in some ways. Like I know we were all isolated, but I mean, like when you were, you know, seeking, right, you had to go to India, right, to find
yeah,
a guru, right? Whereas
yeah,
now they can just turn on the computer, they can sit in a meeting with somebody. So I think in one sense, it it brought that, you know, the teachings quicker. You know, we don't have to go anywhere. Like I mean, like your teaching is a transmission, right? It's not just spoken word.
yeah,
There's an energetic behind that. And actually, I wonder, could we talk about that as well?
yeah,
The transmission behind the teaching,
yeah.
the
That's actually what I meant
non-duality.
when I said the silence.
Yeah,
I
yeah, the
just say it,
transmission.
yeah, that I just say it like in that way because it's such a misunderstood subject. So I just say the silence, like when you're
Yes,
being taught, there's this bending of the mind, but then the silence, and that means like that. I mean, the appropriate way I think that satsang's meant to happen is that it comes from silence. So you bend your
yeah,
mind in silence. And so that means that the person that's starting the satsang, it's actually, I suppose, a group thing, has to start with silence. And I don't mean a hearing silence, I mean a
yeah,
deeper silence. And this is the basis of the beginning of the self-inquiry or investigation that has to
yeah.
happen.
So
And
would you say that spills out into the room? Like, do people feel that energetic? I mean, silence or transmission?
surprisingly, a lot of people don't, but it's happening and it's working. But on the conscious level, I don't think they always recognize it. But there's a certain amount that do, but it's still doing its job, even if the mind doesn't consciously recognize it. It maybe
Okay.
interprets it as it doing yoga, or like it doing self-inquiry, or its past events, or being in a nice room, or not looking after the kids, or not having to work. It interprets it as all different types of things, but it's doing its job
Mhm.
for what it's meant to
And
do.
do you do satsang in person? Do you still do that?
Yeah,
Or
I
not
do.
so
Yeah,
much?
not
You
not
do, yeah.
so not so much, but I do it in person. But I think it's done online. It happens online as well. Like it's
Mm.
like
Yeah.
this, what we call it, transmission, just for simplicity. Like that happens online. But I do think maybe because for me it was going and meeting teachers in person. I think there's something really beautiful about that. I was so
Yeah.
lucky at that period of time that there were these Indian teachers that just gave it in their home. 'Cause I was a student and young, I didn't have the money, and they would just open their homes, and then you could go and sit with them and on a donation basis. Like that's so, I mean, that's such a
That was in
beautiful,
India, right?
yeah,
That was in India?
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
that tends to be the tradition of what happens there.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a shame in the West we don't really have that. Like the government would be in on it. Hang
Oh
on, you're
yeah,
getting a
they
donation.
wouldn't like that.
Like it doesn't really work. You'll be like, okay, go give a donation, but then we first of all have to just work out the VAT.
Yeah, there's no
Like
such
it's
thing as a donation.
yeah,
It's
and it's
it's taxable.
yeah. So, but it's so. I mean, that's just such a beautiful thing in India that I really love that is offered, and that's part of their culture and their tradition to offer this
Mm.
to everybody. You know.
Yeah, I remember I went through a period of kind of studying up on Nisargadatta Maharaj, and he used to do all his teachings from this little apartment, little bedroom upstairs in his house, and people would come, and then the group would get too big, and he would have to throw some people out and tell them not to come back.
Yeah. And this was the same for Ramesh. We used to we sat in his front room. They used to do it in the back room, but then it got bigger, so we sat in his front room. And like some days it'd be so hot, and we'd all be like squished together. There'd be people standing at the back. Yeah, that's so. Yeah, I mean, like that's really something that the whole family, because in in his family, like the families lived together. It's like the whole building was his
Yeah.
family, and they all lived together. And the whole family is prepared to open up their space to all these foreigners that have different culture and different ideas of how you treat someone's front room. And
Yeah, it's remarkable. And when you went, I think I heard you mention like you kind of came across like Adi Ashanti and
yeah,
Muji and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So did you go see a lot of them teachers when you went back to the UK?
No, generally, actually, I saw them in India, like Muji. I don't think I ever saw Muji in the UK, even though I lived really close to him. I think I always saw him in India.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And Ajay Shanti, I've never met. Gangaji, I went to her talks in the UK. Eckhart Tolle, I think I went to talk in the UK. Yeah. Yeah, Adyashanti Roger introduced me to, and actually listening to one of his tapes was one of those awakening experiences where I suddenly had that, he was talking about God, and I had that feeling like God's looking through my eyes, that sudden, like I'm not looking, but there was, what part of those shifts. Yeah.
Yeah. I had no framework when I had my awakening. I was just like, something has happened. I feel amazing. This is great. But I kind of started to realize that I had to figure out or had to kind of internalize it somehow, through my intellect, what had just happened to me. So the first person I came across was Adi Ashanti. I came across his book, The End of Your World, and I
Mm,
was like, this is what's happened to me. I was listening to him and he was talking about it. And I mean, that was such a gift finding him so early on. Such a great teacher.
mm. So
Um,
you had one of these spontaneous awakenings.
yeah, just out of the blue
No
in the gym.
spirituality. I would say it
Well,
really was. You'd never read any spiritual books or anything before.
no, that's not true. So I had been really interested in the out of body phenomena. I was really terrified of dying, right? When I was younger, and I was convinced that I was just a body. And I came across the topic of out of body experiences. And about 3 months after studying, these different books, I started having spontaneous OBEs where I would leave my body. And I mean, that was a spiritual awakening in itself, right? But there was no, I mean, there was still a lot of ego there, right? It wasn't really doing anything for me spiritual. I had some great stories to tell people, about the explorations I was having. And then they died down, and I just kind of kept up the practice of meditation. I just enjoyed meditation. I really, I liked how I felt. And I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, just stopped and inquired, you know, just, and then it just happened. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
wasn't seeking enlightenment. I didn't know what enlightenment was. I didn't know what spiritual awakening was, or
Mm.
self-realization. I had briefly come across Eckhart as well, and I was kind of listening to Eckhart, and I was practicing the power of now. So I was kind of being mindful, and I was probably witnessing without even knowing what witnessing was. I was like, oh wow, I'd never really it dawned on me that, behind my thoughts, there's awareness. So I had probably been witnessing, and then just by inquiring one day, yeah, I just had an awakening, and it was like God was looking out through my eyes.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, exactly what you just
It's
said.
yeah, it's really, I mean, like in the Indian traditions, they would say that's karma, like it's like all your work from your previous lives. But
Yeah,
it's really, yeah, really beautiful when you hear these spontaneous awakenings. Were you doing lucid dreaming?
I had, okay, so funny enough, right? I had had a number of lucid dreams. And when I had my awakening, I realized that I was having a lucid dream in the waking state. So there
Mm.
was something outside of me that had fallen asleep. So again, I guess in a way, the lucid dream kind of gave me like a framework, sort of for what
Yeah.
had happened. I knew in the moment, I was like, this is a lucid dream, but there's another aspect of me that's outside of creation, or outside of, the small me, that has dreamt itself into this character, fallen asleep, dreamt itself into the character, and now it's woke up in me. And something had become lucid here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the
And
lucid dreaming had helped.
beforehand, like, so when you were younger and you said you had the fear of dying, did that start at night? When did,
Yeah, I guess.
like
Yeah.
when you started questioning dying, was it like before going to sleep, or was it during the day? Like was it when you began to get into the evening
Yeah,
time and sleep?
I would go to bed. I'd be put to bed by my parents, and I would be sat there terrified at night time.
Yeah.
Yeah, been
Yeah.
alone in the dark. Yeah.
Now, this is so interesting. I come across this often, like, I mean, not that often. I mean, if we look at it in terms of society, it's like 1 in a billion, but maybe not 1 in a billion, maybe 1 in 500 million. But I come across it like I've come across this quite a few times and I think that, I mean, this is me going into my spirituality, and some people might find this wooey wooey, but I think it's like previous life stuff. And I think falling asleep is a really spiritual experience, because in falling asleep, you're going through this process of dying, of losing yourself. And it's like in Tibet and in a lot of spiritual traditions, this is a very like intense spiritual practice, waking up while you're drifting off into sleep, but you're losing absolute control, you're losing your personal awareness, and you're allowing the subconscious
Yeah.
mind to come up. And so I meet often, well, I mean, I say often, but it's really not if often in comparison to society, but I've met along the path this phenomena. And sometimes what happens is that they then have an awakening, but it scares them so much they go deeply back into sleep. So for
Yeah.
you, it happened and it didn't scare you. You managed to like go over and allow that death to happen. But I feel like it's come from an openness, most probably in a previous life, because it's like these certain people are born into this life, and it normally always starts in childhood with fear of going to sleep and then fear of death.
Yeah. It's funny, Lisa, because I remember being a kid, like I don't know, like 4 or 5, and knowing that there was an awareness that was aware of my thoughts. I remember sitting on the floor with my sister, who was 2 years younger, and us talking about it together. I was like, well, what is that that's actually listening to my thoughts, or the voice? What is that part? And at that young age, known. And it's funny that you say it, that I know from previous lives that I had awakenings in previous lives. So it carried on into this life. And I think what happens is, I don't, you still fall asleep. When you come back
Yeah,
in, you fall back asleep and you have to go through it all again.
yeah.
But yeah, it had been from previous lives. Yeah.
But you have that like tendency to, for the mind, or for the mind to question itself. That tendency is there, that karmic pattern. I don't even know what you call these things. But
Well,
yes, yeah,
for me, it was truth. I was a truth seeker. I wanted to find
yeah.
out, like, so yeah, this is your interview. I'm sorry,
But it just
just for the
interests me when I
conversation.
hear it. But yeah, but it really interests me when I hear this, because I've come across this phenomena,
Yeah.
like, and it's when it's spontaneous awakenings like you, it's often this lucid dream. It's about, yeah, it often happens like this.
Yeah, I just couldn't figure out why I was here. I was like, what is this place? Like, why am I here? Who are these people? Like my parents. And my parents were good parents, but to me, I was like, like, who are they? Why are they weird? And I was always like, I never fit in. That was something I always noticed. And I guess that not fitting in, you know, kind of pushed me to question everything. I really wanted to know.
Mm.
I wonder, did that happen to you as well? Because you went off on a spiritual seeking journey, right?
Yeah, it happened to me in a
Seeking
different.
truth.
It happened to
Yeah,
me in a different way. I happened it in I mean, this is like really me going off on just saying stuff I
that's
have
okay though.
no like.
That's okay.
But I think maybe it happened in the more feminine way here, and that's maybe a more masculine way. And the reason that I put it in that category is, yeah, because I had the everything thing. So I think that the fear death one happens when you've got more of the nothingness blasting through.
Mm.
And so for me, what happened was I began to do these tantric meditations really young, where I would start imagining having everything I wanted. And as I began to imagine having everything I wanted, I would evoke more and more love. And yeah, this would carry on. And then until the love like overtook me, and then there was just love. And there was no me wanting anything anymore. There was, so I had the opposite to you, but
And
the
you were doing that
same
as a
thing.
kid.
Yeah, accidentally. But I did it through
Wow.
relationships. It's always a bit of embarrassing. So I'd start imagining, having like the perfect boyfriend. I mean, this was maybe like 9, 10. I'd listen to music and I'd imagine having the perfect boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, I don't know if I really saw a difference. And then I would imagine our life together. It's like playing dolls or something, like having, so it wasn't sexual. It was
Yeah.
like I would, imagine the perfect family, or imagine like all the details of it. And as I imagined it, that this love would grow in me. And so then I began to enjoy doing it. So then I would do it regularly. And then as the love grew in me, then the imagining of the object stopped. And and
Feeling
then
state.
as yeah, and then the it would grow until I would just be in a meditation, but I didn't even know that was what was happening. I just really, it's like I loved it, but also didn't want it. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this actually screwed me up having relationships, romantic relationships, because then as soon as I started having romantic relationships, I always knew that I could evoke everything internally. So there was never the sense that the partner could give me that. There was never the
And you
looking for the partner.
probably you probably set the bar really, really high as well. They probably they couldn't match up to that.
Yeah, like it was, I don't even know if I had a bar, because I just absolutely knew without a doubt that they couldn't do that. So then I think what it came across as a bit uninterested. And there was an element of uninterested and detachment, that I liked having relationships. There was also a deep knowing that I couldn't get the love from them. Like
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Well,
But that's
well,
so
the love
it,
was always inside, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so I did the opposite to what you did, and I did it like I would sit and listen to romantic music. That I'd put the headphones on and put all my mum's like romantic music and I would put pillows around me and I'd hug, my pillows or my toy, and I would just it was like, yeah. I think
Um,
that's why I say the masculine and the feminine, where it's like the opposite.
Lisa, what about Kundalini? Did Kundalini ever show up in your system?
Well, I never studied that, but there's definitely all this stuff happen with the chakras, like loads of
Yeah.
energy through the chakras and opening of the chakras. But I never studied that. What Roger taught me to do was to massage parts of my body where there was pain and then to pay attention and watch stories that came out. And then this would send energies to, sort of have all these experiences,
Yeah.
right? Then suddenly be laying in bed for a day, shaking and
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating, because from my understanding, it seems that the body mind there needs to be a rewiring of the nervous system to hold the greater states of consciousness in
yeah,
awakening. And I think that's what the Kundalini rising is, right? It's the purifying of the chakras and
yeah,
the energetic pathways that are being connected, and the two hemispheres of the brain eventually become whole when the Kundalini rises. And I guess it's the feminine side of the awakening as well, right? The fullness and
yeah,
the Shakti side. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I love.
Amazing. Yeah. So yeah, is there anything else?
Is there anything else I would like to discuss? Mm.
I mean, I love the way different people bring out a different side of a person. Like, because I was listening to some of your interviews, and we've totally brought out a different side in this one.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because communication is such a two thing. It's
Yeah.
not a one thing, it's a two thing that becomes
Yeah.
one.
I
So
I
you
always
create a new personality.
Yeah, I always try to kind of stay in the kind of, I'm the one doing the interview, but I mean, so much good stuff comes up when it becomes kind of like a dialogue, right, between
Yeah.
the two of
Mm.
us. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, whatever arises.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about, okay, so while we're on the subject of like the energetic side, do you notice that happening in your satsangs? Does any of that ever start to
Yeah.
to pop off? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
What does that look like?
It can look like all different things.
Laughter.
Hysterical laughter, hysterical
Yeah.
crying, like huge emotions coming up, shaking, all different
And that's
types
not
of
happening
things.
just from talking, right, Lisa?
Yeah.
That's something else happening.
Yeah. Burning in particular chakras, like tense burning sensation or tight sensation. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, amazing. And that is the power of the transmission. That's kind of the substratum of the satsang.
Mm.
Because satsang it's truth gathering, right? Is it? That's what it
Yeah.
means
Meeting,
in
yeah, meeting in
in
truth.
sat
Yeah.
meeting in truth. Yeah, yeah, fascinating. So, is there anything else we can cover?
I'm sure there is lots we could cover, but maybe I could feel my energy going more into silence now. So maybe that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can always come back at a later date as well if you
Yeah.
were up for it. If there was something else, because I
Yeah, that
really
was,
enjoyed this.
yeah, me too. That
Yeah,
was really, really beautiful. And I really loved hearing about your experience. I love hearing these things because over the years, if you really listen to people, like so 12 years, I begin to make all these correlations. This story that you've had, I've heard, it's really beautiful to hear it again.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of people. I mean, it's happening to so many people now.
Yeah.
Just spontaneous awakenings. They pick up a book on self-inquiry, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they have a shift into non-duality. It's
Yeah.
incredible. Something is definitely happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lisa, for people to find you, I'm going to put links to your YouTube channel, to your
Yeah, that's
website, to
great.
your
Yeah.
social media. Have you written a book?
No, no.
No, okay. No,
There
okay.
is a book that was transcribed of my talks in 2012 and 13. So there's
Okay.
that.
And can people find that
Yeah, on my
on
website. Yeah.
Amazon? Okay,
Yeah.
on your website. So I'll put links to everything. And yeah, is there any of you like for people if they want to find your meetings, like what do you
Most
meet? Is
things,
it open
yeah,
to everybody?
yeah. The thing I do is I do a live stream on YouTube every week. That's kind of my social media thing that I do. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's the YouTube channel, the place to
yeah.
link. But you can find that on my website. So my website's also handy as well.
Yeah. So in the description of the video, or if people are listening on the podcast, I'll put all the links to Lisa's social medias and her website and everything like that.
Yeah, I'm a bit inactive on everything except YouTube. So it's just YouTube
I'm
once a
the
week I
same.
do.
I'm the same. I detest social media, and the only one I enjoy doing is YouTube for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
It feels better. Yeah, yeah. So Lisa, thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
on. I
thank you. Yeah,
really, really, really. It was honestly great. Really amazing.
yeah. Yeah, really lovely to meet you too. Yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
inviting me.
and I'll reach out again
Yeah,
for a future
definitely.
talk, definitely. So yeah, so thanks to everybody who tuned in and watched or listened on the podcast. Lisa, thanks again. Take care. Bye bye, everybody.